Hey there, everybody. It's me, your buddy Dave, the host here at the Dark Stuff channel on YouTube. Thanks a lot for checking out my latest video. And today I am bringing you the latest installment in my series, Pullin Random from my record collection. Hey there, everyone. In my never-ending quest to come up with great content here at the Dark Stuff, I realized that there are loads of great artists and great albums that rarely even get so much as a mention here. To expand my repertoire, as it were, I came up with this series. I started by walking over to my record racks. Careful not to look where I'm reaching, I grabbed something from the collection totally 100% at random. Wow, look what I just grabbed. Naturally, I give the record a spin, and then I report back to you guys. Sometimes I pull some forgotten gems, a real classic. Sometimes I pull some total crap. Stay tuned to find out which of those we have this week. This week I pulled the debut solo record from a founding member of one of the most successful and important groups of the early 1980s. Yeah, so this week I pulled the self-titled debut solo album from Jane Wiedlin. This came out in 1985 on IRS. Let's see, here's the inner sleeve. Great picture of Jane there. Then you got the lyrics on the other side. And so everybody knows Jane Wiedlin as a founding member of the Go-Go's. The Go-Go's, one of the most significant groups of the 1980s and really of the entire pop music era. They are credited as being the first all-female band to write their own songs, play all their own instruments, and have a #1 record. The Go-Go's debut album went to #1. I mean, that's almost unheard of for a band that had just formed just a few years prior. So the Go-Go's formed in the punk scene of the late 70s in Los Angeles. The Go-Go's were like a really, really important band to me growing up as a kid. I remember, I think their album, Beauty and the Beat, came out in 81. Maybe it was 82, but either way, I would say 10 or 11 years old when that record came out. And I distinctly remember going to the department store in Omaha. It was Richmond Gordman. That was the department store at the time. Getting the 45 for We Got the Beat and just playing the shit out of that back at my house. So to me, Jane Wiedlin always seemed like the cool Go-Go, you know, like she was more punk rock or whatever than the other girls were, you know. I mean, Billy Zoom of X showed her first guitar chord, you know, gave her first kind of guitar lesson. How freaking cool is that? Remember that song she did with Sparks? I wanna go to cool places with you. I wanna take it cool. And the Go-Go's song Yes or No was written with her and Sparks. So she seemed like the coolest of the Go-Go's. So Jane Wiedlin quit the Go-Go's in 1984 after the tour for their third album, Talk Show. Talk Show was a huge record. The Go-Go's were still doing extremely, extremely well. Now, if you watch the documentary that came out a couple years ago on Showtime, Jane told them ahead of time that she was going to be quitting at the end of the tour, so it was not a surprise. Sort of reminds me of like when Richie Blackmore announced he was going to leave Deep Purple, but he's like, I'm going to do this whole tour first, and then after the tour, I'll quit. Now, the question when a band member leaves a famous group and goes on and forms their own thing, if they weren't the front person and Belinda Carlisle was the singer in the Go-Go's, well, what was this going to sound like? Was this going to be any good? Could she even sing? Well, we kind of knew that Jane Wiedlin could sing because, at least on the very first national single, Our Lips Are Sealed, came out, she does the part where it goes, you know, hush, my darling, you know, okay, that's her. So we already knew she could sing. She had that high angelic voice or whatever, but it was only in little bits of songs or in backup vocals. We never really heard her do an entire song. The music on the solo album really doesn't resemble the Go-Go's very much at all. They use a drum machine on most of the tracks. And again, this is just sounding very, very 80s. This was 1985. But what it does is it puts Jane's like sweet voice, you know, it juxtaposes it with like these really like cold mechanical arrangements. And one thing about the Go-Go's records is they were just so bright and they had just a great feel to them. Now, I know they don't, Jane Wiedlin kind of swears off that third record, just doesn't really care for it anymore. I think it's great, and the sound of it's great, and you just, if they could have had a little bit more of that feel, just a little bit, I know it wasn't a band, but a little more of a band feel on this album, it would have gone a long way. So in addition to the kind of more mechanical arrangements, which is different from the more organic sounding stuff from the Go-Go's, it has a real overall melancholy feel. Like a lot of the lyrics reflect kind of a sadness that was unusual for Jane Wiedlin, at least as far as the fans kind of knew, right? Because Jane always seemed like the happy, upbeat, the fun go-go, you know, always smiling, always cheerful. But obviously there was another side to her, and there was some other stuff, some other feelings that were going on that really weren't expressed in the Go-Go's. People were used to seeing Jane Wiedlin a certain way, and then this album presented her in a different way, and I think people were kind of thrown by that, and that might have contributed to the fact that it wasn't super successful. And before we get into the track by track, I will say that part of the reason why I think the album sounds kind of disjointed and not as cohesive as some of the Go-Go's records was because there's 4 different producers. 4 different people are named as producers, so it's sort of like, no wonder it's disjointed, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen. All right, folks, let's get into the record, starting off with side 1. The first track was also the first single. It's called Blue Kiss. It's a really great poppy love song. It is really good. It does get overwhelmed again by the trendy 80s production, and I'm going to try not to point that out when I'm discussing like virtually every song, but that does happen so often, you know? I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I mean, man, if you could just take some of that stuff out of it and hear just a raw track. I remember seeing back in the early days of MTV, she wasn't playing her usual Gibson SG, you know? I always thought that was Jane Wiedlin's signature guitar. I mean, I've seen her do interviews where she talks about why she likes the guitar so much, because of the size and the weight and the action, the way it plays and everything. I mean, when I think of the Gibson SG, I think of either Angus Young from AC/DC or Jane Wiedlin, but she was playing some different kind of guitar in the video. It's kind of surprising. Okay, next up is the song Goodbye Cruel World. Now, I referenced this one early as showing a little bit more of a social conscience than we had known Jane Wiedlin to have. It's very political. It's a little bit overly simplistic, if I'm just going to be honest with you, you know. But it's hard to argue with her dream of, like, you know, a more loving and peaceful world and everybody getting along together, and people don't kill animals for sport, and people don't do this and that, you know. And it's like, yeah, I agree with all of it, you know. It's not Bob Dylan lyrically, but you know what? So what? Now, the next track on side 1 is called Sometimes You Really Get on My Nerves. It's kind of it's a synthy pop song. It's kind of upbeat and whatever. I think if this song would have been done by the Go-Go's, for example, like, it would have been so much better, okay? Because it does have, if it had that kind of punky energy from the Go-Go's as opposed to this sort of synthy way, like, it's still good, right? But if it had a more organic feel and had a band, I think it would, this song would be another one that maybe would have stood the test of time, perhaps. Okay, next up, it's called East Meets West. It's another one of Jane's kind of more political songs, or at least a little more socially conscious songs. It's kind of a fun, upbeat rocker again. The lyrics are more about kind of a commentary on different attitudes about religion and God in the world. She is making the comment, I guess, the commentary that in America we're a lot more superficial than they are perhaps in other places in the world. Maybe that's not what she's saying, but that's how I interpreted it. I don't disagree with that. The song is like, okay, she starts singing in another language. Maybe it was Japanese. Maybe it's, I honestly didn't know, but I didn't like it. But the song is all right. It's just not among my favorites. Next up is a tune called Somebody's Going to Get Into This House. This one wasn't written by Jane Wiedlin at all, written by an outside songwriter. It's still a pretty decent rocker. The lyrics seem to be something about just about being paranoid while you're locked inside your own home. You know. Okay, side one closes out with a really good tune called Forever. Okay, it's kind of a mid-tempo rocker. It does sound very 80s again with the production, but it reminds me a little bit more of Talking Heads. Lyrically, it's kind of strange, and I can't tell if she's being serious or sarcastic. Honestly, I'm just going to leave that to you. I'm not going to try and delve into what I think the song is about. But those were the notes I said. I was like, is she being serious or is there sarcasm here? I honestly couldn't tell. But I would say that this is probably the second best track on the record next to Blue Kiss. So it's a good way to close out side one. Okay, side two kicks off with this tune called Modern Romance. And it sounds kind of like, I wrote down the Motels meets ABC, so two big bands from the 1980s. It's a decent tune. It's kind of a ballad a little bit, where Jane kind of questions the merits of the single life. You know, what's so great about modern romance? What's so great about sleeping around? She didn't like it. She'd rather be part of a couple. She's not into this scene. She is not about modern romance. And that's kind of a timeless sentiment, I guess, that you could go with. So this is a pretty good tune. Unfortunately, that Modern Romance is followed up quickly with a really kind of weak one called I Will Wait For You. Kind of just a generic radio song written by somebody else. Again, probably inserted by the producer or something. That was just such a thing in the 80s. Why did they do that? No commentary on this one. It wasn't really a very memorable tune. Next up is 100 Years of Solitude. Now, with a title like that, you have a pretty decent idea that it is a kind of a sad one, okay? In it, Jane is kind of reflecting on some failed relationships. It's notable in this one because the band features Randy Jackson, who most people probably know from American Idol. He also did a stint in Journey for a little while. I think right after this, probably in about 1986, he was in the band. Now, the song is pretty good, like I said. I kind of like it, but the production, again, mars it, and I hate to keep pointing that out. And the use of studio musicians kind of made the song remind me of Mr. Mister, okay? And I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. I'm not like a Mr. Mister fan, Take these broken wings. On a positive note, the song does use live drums, and I like that because whenever the songs that use the live drums, I just like so much better. Next song is called Where We Can Go, and Randy Jackson is on this track also, and Billy Zoom returns. Well, not returns because he hasn't been on this record yet, but I did point out earlier on that Billy Zoom was the one who taught Jane her first guitar chords, and now he plays on this particular track. Billy Zoom from the band X. This is a fast rocker. Could have been a great Go-Go's song without question. I mean, it would have been better with the Go-Go's than with this particular record. You know what I would have liked them to have done is the Go-Go's to have recorded it when they did their comeback album in 2000, 2001 or whatever, where they did that God Bless the Go-Go's record. If they could have tried to do Where We Can Go on that, I mean, where was I 22 years ago to have recommended it? But okay, and the last song on the record is probably my least favorite. So unfortunately, the record kind of closes on a bad note. It's called My Traveling Heart. It's another kind of sad, melancholy song. I said that was kind of a general feel of the album. Now, I've read some reviews and some analysis of the record where people were saying they thought this was about her leaving the band. I don't know. Maybe it's about a breakup. Maybe it's about a breakup with the band. Kind of hard to say. The song is just not that good, so I don't really feel like extending a ton of energy into wondering what specifically this tune is about. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the album. Well, it is the end of the album, and what I would say was I think this was a pretty good pull. I mean, when I bought the Jane Wiedlin record, and I have her next one, Fur, also in my collection, I remember giving it a quick listen, being like, okay, and then filing it away. This time, I did get a lot more out of it than any sort of initial listen. That's for sure. This record does suffer the fate of so many 80s records of just the ridiculously trendy and now, of course, very, very dated sounding 80s production. Whenever you're chasing that trend and you're trying to sound super of that moment, that's the stuff that's going to sound the most dated. And, I wonder if you could strip all this stuff down and just hear the core tracks. I think 3 or 4 or 5 of these songs would be like standout, exceptional tracks, as opposed to just being kind of okay songs in the way that they came out. Since the Go-Go's broke up, Jane Wiedlin's only done 4 solo albums, this one and 3 other ones. She did Fur in 88, Tangled in 1990. 10 years later, she put out an album called Kiss Proof World, and then that was it. She did a cover of the Velvet Underground, Foggy Notion, a couple years ago as a single. It's pretty cool. I would look into it. All right, this pretty much wraps up the video. Thanks a lot for watching, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.